Hi, I'm Ben Avery, and this is Strangers and Aliens. Strangers and Aliens is a video feed, but it's also a podcast and a website and a Facebook page. It's all about the intersection of science fiction, fantasy, and faith, Christianity, and pop culture. Today, I'm going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart. I had a hard time figuring out how do I want to categorize this. I decided not to do this as a is it worth reading thing because the answer is a little bit complicated, and also, this is not the direct actual book. Today, I'm here to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart in two ways, though. One is it is C.S. Lewis related, and C.S. Lewis is someone, as you would know if you've watched any of the videos here on the Strangers and Aliens channel, or if you have listened to the podcast, you know I love C.S. Lewis. He changed my life with his writing. The other thing we're going to talk about today is comic book, and comic books are another thing that are very near and dear to me, mainly because I enjoyed them as a child. I enjoyed them in college. I enjoy them now, but they also have been a way of putting food on the table for my family. The point being, C.S. Lewis, comic books, I'm there. And so a news item came up on one of my Facebook feed or Twitter feed, and it was about a comic book that was by C.S. Lewis. And now, it wasn't written by him to be a comic book, but it was taken by some people and fed into an artificial intelligence art generator. And they took, line by line, the essay, The Abolition of Man, and turned it into this comic book here. And so that's what I'm talking about right now. Here is what they wrote in the afterword. The book you hold in your hands is the result of an unusual experiment. The first comic book entirely illustrated by an artificial intelligence system. All the images in this book were generated using the Mid-Journey AI/Imagine prompt from June 3rd to June 4th, 2022. This AI system, trained on images from the entirety of digitized human visual history, produces 4 image options based on whatever text prompt the user enters. The AI was fed C.S. Lewis's essay, The Abolition of Man, one sentence at a time. Hopefully, having just read this book, you can see why it was my go-to source for this experiment in AI illustrated comics. Each panel in this book is made of the prompt the AI was fed and the one image of the 4 options I felt best represented the meaning of said prompt. I limited myself to choosing from the initial 4 images. The experiment was to see what the AI did of its own accord. All of the power user tricks used to refine images are human interventions that veil whatever actual intelligence this AI has. Our goal here was to see this intelligence in its rawest form. The only alterations made to the images in this book were small content-aware deletions and dodges/burns intended to make the lettering easier to read. In the next issue that they're going to do, they are doing a comic book script that they wrote and fed into the AI, trying to get the results that they wanted. And then that's issue 2 and 3, I think. And then issue 4, they are trying to get something that's generated both story and images to create a comic book. And then issue 5 is something else that I think might have been added later on after they had started the book. So anyway, that's what the book is meant to be. What is this book in reality? Well, there's a lot of things I could say about the book. There's a lot of things that I went back and forth about. What do I want to talk about when I talk about this? But I felt like I had to do it now. There really hasn't been too much press about this. There really hasn't been too much talk about this. I brought it up on a C.S. Lewis fan Facebook group, and there was some back and forth about some people had heard of it, some people hadn't. Some people, when they did hear about it, were just like, well, just read the book, which we'll talk about that, but that's one of my opinions about this. Some people were like, I want to see this. I want to get this. Where can I get this? And the answer to where can you get this is probably the easiest thing for you to do would be to contact your local comic book shop and see if they're able to order it. Carson Grubaugh is the name of the person who wrote the book, illustrated the book, picked the pictures to go into the book. And so that's who's behind this. But when I was reading it, I just found myself being fascinated by the technology, but a little bit disappointed as well. This is really it's a game of digital word association. yes, the words were fed into the machine, but there was no context behind them. And so some of this carries the illusion of meaning in some ways, where you look at it and you're like, oh, yeah, there's some meaning behind this picture. And but I would compare that to the Dancing Spider-Man or the Dancing Baby from years ago, where you could play any music with it and it seemed like it was dancing to that music because that's what your brain expected it to do and your brain wanted it to do. When you're looking at this, there's an expectation of there is meaning behind the images. But the only meaning behind the images is kind of this random selection of images that are related to the meanings of the words that were fed in, but without context. So each sentence of the essay got fed in one sentence at a time and becomes a panel in the book. And each sentence here then carries its own meaning, and so there's not a continuity of meaning either. So it's a visualization of baby speak, where the images and the words are parroted back without context, and the context comes from Carson Grubaugh going through and choosing one of the 4 best images to go along with this will be changed here. And so he chose this out of 4 different images. And then this next sentence goes in, it says, values are now mere natural phenomenon. And that gets parroted back. And it gives 4 images that have something to do with the meaning of those words. And so he chose the best one. Now, don't get me wrong, he chose some interesting and disturbing, honestly, images. And the ones that work the best are the ones that are simple prompts with this small sentence, because there's, I think, less of a word salad that's being chosen from. I have a friend, J.S. Earls, who he's playing with AI art right now, and he puts in some very simple prompts. And so he put in a prompt of Happy Godzilla, and it brought up images of Happy Godzilla. And those simple prompts with the simple images can carry the context from prompt to image and then back to the reader. I look at it and I see Happy Godzilla. Less with this. The simpler sentences definitely produced simpler results. And so this one right here on page 7 says, each new power won by man is a power over man as well. And you got this image here of a man, and there's definitely, you look at that and you can see man, power, and it works. It works. Some sentences you can see then from looking at it what words the AI latched onto, like, for example, this one here where it says, how are they going to be motivated by themselves? And you have a guy carrying weights, and you have he's by himself. He is motivated though, and this is where the picture kind of takes on the opposite meaning of the sentence, where he's saying, how is it possible, how is it going to happen? And this is actually showing it happening. Someone by himself who's motivated with weights, and here's a group that's only got one weight amongst the whole group. And so it kind of goes against the actual meaning of the sentence. On page 15 you have this one that produces an, I think, inadvertent pun, but it says, human nature has been conquered, and of course has conquered in whatever sense those words may now bear. And there you have a giant bear. So you have this, this double meaning, this pun, I think an inadvertent pun. There's another one here on the next page over where it says, the question is which, if any, they should produce. And it has produce. It's an apple, okay? And so you have some places where the AI latched on to maybe the wrong word. The thing is, I could see the same kind of book with the same style of artwork being produced, especially in the 90s. And so, like, it reminds me of the artwork of Dave McKeon and of the different vertical books from the 90s, where they had this kind of rough style and kind of this avant-garde surreal thing going on. It honestly really reminds me of Dave McKeon's Sandman covers. It reminded them as well. And so they actually, in that afterward that they wrote, they said they actually have an interview with Dave McKeon about this technology that's coming up. And I don't know anything more about that, but I read comic books that looked like this back in the 90s when I was in college and I was getting back into comics. Those avant-garde kind of artists who are doing just weird things with photos and photo manipulation, and then getting into Photoshop, and you have the technology changing the way the art is created. And it reminds me of that. I'm curious about the content of this book because of just how this works with well, honestly, just the copyright of the essay. There is nothing in here that says anything about the C.S. Lewis estate or any kind of permissions that they got to use that artwork, or the words rather, to create this artwork and to create this product. So you have this kind of unlicensed product here, and I'm really curious what the C.S. Lewis estate thinks about this book. I'm also curious if anything can be done. This could the case could be made that this is a transformative work. I feel like this is not truly AI though, because the author picked and chose, and so this is definitely a first in the sense that it is, I think, the first released comic book that I am aware of that used AI artwork for the entirety of the book. But the aesthetic of the book comes from being selected by Carson Grubaugh. And so the aesthetic and the choices are human directed, and the initial prompts are all human directed. And so I'm curious where this will go. This is definitely a first, but I think there will be another first that comes after this, which is the first comic book ever written and illustrated by AI, which I think is, again, going to be happening with Carson Grubaugh himself. But it's interesting, too, that this work, to me, doesn't work in what it sets itself up to be, which this is not a narrative comic book. That is also coming from this company and will also come under the title, The Abolition of Man. But this is actually more of an illumination of a text. And when you have this context-less drawings of random keywords that turn into random drawings, you end up with some panels that are just amazing. And I almost feel like it's an accident that they are amazing. And you have this panel here where it says, "The stars lost their divinity as astronomy developed, and the dying god has no place in chemical agriculture." But then look at that image right there. That is so evocative. And when you look at it, you can kind of imagine the keywords that got pulled there are agriculture, gods, astronomy, and stars. It's all there. And that is kind of cool to look at. The second one on the same page here is this one. The text says, "Little scientists and little unscientific followers of science may think so." And there's the image. You just have these little scientists, okay? I could see a whole book that looks like that. That would make a really great book. Actually, if the Abolition of Man essay was illustrated like this, that would be fantastic. Let's see here. On page 30, the text says, "The wresting of powers from nature is also the surrendering of things to nature." If you look at that image right there, like, you can see this push and pull and this tension between nature and, nature. The problem is, as you look at the images that were created by the word salad that got dumped in and that were, selected somehow by the AI to create some sort of visual meaning, is that, like I said, it's not a true AI that's selecting this. It's a human who is looking at and selecting from these word salad images. And he creates an interesting work here, but it's Carson Grubaugh's work for sure. And it definitely fits a certain aesthetic. And so you have artwork that is interesting. You have artwork that, to me, is somewhat illuminating in a couple of these panels, but then also that kind of goes against the meaning of some of these panels, and then also some that just has no meaning at all. It's surreal, but it doesn't fit the context of what the sentences are saying. And then there's also some very disturbing and unsettling imagery. There is body mutilation, surreal mutilation of the body, and you have these strange positions of limbs and fingers coming out of places that aren't supposed to have fingers, and and that sort of thing. And so what gets created then is something that I don't believe is something that you need on your shelf if you are a fan of C.S. Lewis. This is something for someone who is a fan of AI artwork. This is something that is a novelty for someone who's looking for something new in comic book creation or new in artwork generation, but not someone who's looking for new meaning behind C.S. Lewis's words. This is not a scholarly work that is going to cause you to look at C.S. Lewis in a new light, or look at his essay in a new light, or have new understanding of what he's trying to say when he wrote The Abolition of Man. And that is where I would say, yeah, definitely, read the essay. If you want to know what The Abolition of Man says, it's a wonderful essay, and it's very, very short. It can fit into a 42-page comic book with one sentence on 6 panels of each page. So this is where I get into, like, is this a transformative thing? Is there transformative value in what they did here? And I think in the end, yes, there is, because you have this juxtaposition of a visual that comes from technology that leaves humans behind by the artificial intelligence, with a lot of help from Carson Grubaugh. But on the other hand, you have this essay about losing humanity as we lose our morality, as we lose these ideas that C.S. Lewis brings up as these kind of universal morals that he calls the Tao. And this is created, though, by a human thinker, a very human thinker. And so in that sense, it does what it was meant to do. I think that's what he talks about when he says this was my only choice of what I could have done for this first thing here, is to use the abolition of man. And I will say that as I was looking at this, there was one very interesting thing that came out of it, is that there was a lot of totalitarian imagery in the artwork that was generated and then selected. And that was what Lewis was talking about, is this kind of totalitarian state that we will end up in as we lose our humanity. And so I found that interesting. And so I actually, I'm kind of proving myself wrong in some sense when I say you're not going to get maybe too much of a new perspective on what you've got with C.S. Lewis's thing. I did have a couple moments of, like, that's an interesting thing that was brought up because of the AI. But all things considered, if you want to know what C.S. Lewis has to say about morality, if you want to know what C.S. Lewis has to say about modernism and industrialism, stick with this, okay? Stick with this. It's going to be a little bit cheaper, maybe. This is a $7 book. This, honestly, is performance art. It's performance art that makes a point. It's performance art that makes a point about art that's being created by the artificial intelligence. And it's a man who took this challenge to create this book and to select, he set some very strict guidelines for himself: feed it in, take the first 4 images and choose one of them. I appreciate that, the artistic challenge. I really appreciate that on his part. But like I said, it's really, this is a novelty in artificial intelligence art generation, and not an essential in the C.S. Lewis canon. But I am curious what other C.S. Lewis fans have to say about this. Please let me know in the comments below. And did you like it more than I did? Did you get more out of it than I did? Do you think I'm reading too much into it? I don't know. But if nothing else, I had fun talking about it with you. So until next time, I just want to say thank you so much for spending time with me, but also as you leave and as you go your way, go on your journeys, whether it's to the comic book store to pick this thing up, or whether it's to eBay to pick this up. This is an old copy. Godspeed.